everybody, my name's Fiona Stubbs. I'm the Careers Manager here at the College of Medical Veterinary and Life Sciences. It's a real pleasure to be with you today. I'm joined with two people today. Zoe Storm, who's a Year 4 student in marine and freshwater biology. And we're delighted to be interviewing Rhona Kent, who's a polar ocean specialist at the WWF. Anyway, before we start our questions today, I just wanted to tell you about the Big Brave. So I've got the script, so I'm going to read it. So the Big Brave is the closing event for each of our careers fairs. It offers the opportunity to hear a career story from an ambitious and accomplished person who's achieved success through what we say is bravery, passion, and just sheer determination to make an impact in the world. We're having this Q&A. It's designed to answer pressing questions with the things that we want to know that are relevant to students right now and in the future. We've had lots of Big Braves rescheduled this semester. And if you want to look at Glasgow careers, you can check out the other speakers. But we're here today with you, Rhona. And we just wanted to say that you are a polar ocean specialist, and this is your biog, just so we can tell everybody. We're a polar ocean specialist with WWF UK, which is a global wildlife charity with a mission to conserve nature and reduce the most pressing threats to the diversity of life on Earth. In partnership with the wider polar team, both in the UK and across the world, you develop policy on polar ocean governance and conservation, including on southern and Arctic oceans fisheries and marine protected areas. Before moving into polar advocacy, you worked with the WWF marine team on fisheries management across the UK and the EU, with particular focus on post-Brexit UK and devolved fisheries legislation. Before you joined WWF, you worked for the Scottish Government in Marine Conservation Team with responsibility for the development of the Scottish Marine Protected Areas Network. You started your career as a scientific fisheries observer on Scottish whitefish and scientific research vessels. You graduated from our university, University of Glasgow, with a BSc in Marine and Freshwater Biology, the same as Zoe, and hold an MC in Aquatic Ecosystem Management from Edinburgh Napier University. Lots. What an illustrious career you've had to date. Anyway, welcome, Rhona. Thank you very much for your time, as we've said. On to our first questions, and Zoe and I are going to be doing a bit of a dual responsibility here. I'll ask some questions and then Zoe will ask some questions, but the first two are mine. What made you choose your degree and why here at University of Glasgow?
Yeah, so thanks for having me here to talk to you today and answer some questions. So I always really wanted to study marine biology, and so when I was at primary school, that was sort of when I had sort of decided that I wanted to study, well, really I wanted to study dolphins. That was what I thought at that time, and I spoke to the teacher and she said, oh well, that would be a marine biologist. So it was really from that point onwards I had set my mind on becoming a marine biologist, because I loved the oceans and learning about the oceans and looking in the rock pools whenever I went to the seaside on holiday. So that was really, it's always been something that I've been interested in and been passionate about, and that was why I decided to study marine biology. So I decided to come to the University of Glasgow because I'm from quite close to Glasgow. I'm from Wishaw originally, so some people might know where that is. So that was part of the decision, but I also really like the sound of the course as well. When you go and you look at all the courses for what you're interested in, and it was something that I like the sound of, and also because it has such a good reputation as well as a university, so it seemed like the natural fit going. It meant I could stay at home as well when I was at uni, so I didn't have to spend a lot of money on accommodation and things like that.
Thank you. Second question, so why did you do a master's after your undergrad? It's something that a lot of students consider as an option. So why a master's, and then why did you choose the aquatic ecosystems management, which is a bit of a mouthful, as the degree choice?
Yeah, so when I graduated, it was 2009. So it was just after the the last sort of financial crash, and there weren't many job opportunities at that time. It was quite, I mean, like the students will be facing now after all the pandemic and everything like that, it's like quite a tough market for jobs and things, because I hadn't actually planned to do a master's. It wasn't something that I had thought that I really wanted to do when I finished uni. So I was working with the local council once I graduated, just in the office there. And so eventually I sort of thought, well, if I go back and do a master's, that might help me with my job opportunities in marine biology. So I did actually look at the University of Glasgow's master's course as well for marine biology that they had at that time. I'm not sure if it's still available now. And but I did notice a few of the modules overlapped with some of the things that I'd studied in fourth year. So I actually had a friend who went to the University of Glasgow as well and graduated at the same time as me. And he had went on to do the Masters at Edinburgh Napier sort of the year before me. So he went straight there and done that in the aquatic ecosystem management. So I asked for his advice and he said it was a really good course. It was interesting. And that's really why I decided to go for that. And also, again, it's sort of because where we live in Wishaw, or where I lived at the time, I could travel in and out every day and not pay for accommodation and things like that. So that was another good factor when deciding.
Over to you, Zoe.
Yeah, so I was wondering what your honours project was about and what your master's thesis was about. And then also if you think that the topics that you chose for your honours project and master's thesis helped in shaping your career later, or if that's something that we kind of as like students overthink a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, so hopefully I can remember. So my fourth year honours project was about the shoaling behaviour of sticklebacks. So that actually went to Loch Lomond at River Denon, where the university has its field station there. Caught some sticklebacks in the river, and then I had to sort of separate them by phenotype and sort of monitor their shoaling behaviour under different environmental conditions that we sort of simulated in the lab. So that was really interesting. It was good because it was actually, I got to go out into the field and get some field experience. And then my thesis for my master's degree was, it was looking at the sustainable urban drainage ponds in Dunfermline. So that was, again, I got to go out into the field to the sustainable urban drainage ponds in an estate there, and I had to collect samples from the inlets and the outlets of each of the ponds and sort of analyse the difference between the different organisms at each to check if the drainage ponds were actually helping to improve the water quality. So that was quite interesting as well. So I had to go and sort of fish out all the little things like that and separate them, count them all, identify them. So that was another interesting experience. I think, to be honest, the topics for the thesis have not really applied with my jobs, but that's probably because I've been more in the policy side of marine biology. If I'd been a researcher, I'm sure it would have helped me to get into those different specialisms. So I think sometimes probably I remember trying to pick the topic for my fourth year thesis, and I think that you do overthink it, definitely, but ultimately you can make whatever you pick, it's going to be of benefit to you. So don't worry about it too much, would be my advice.
And can I just, as the careers person, I think the project is one of your great selling points when you're applying for jobs. And even though you might not use it directly in the job, you've gone through a lot of processes. that you can talk about, and you are in essence a specialist in that time on that subject, which is a great place to be. So I think your thesis is important. It might not get used directly, but it's a good thing for you to talk about.
Yeah, I could just jump in on that actually. When I got my first job at the Marine Laboratory in Aberdeen, I did speak about the project that I'd done at the Sustainable Urban Drainage Funds, and some of them actually had sort of sewage and things in them, which was a bit disgusting. So I mentioned that in the job interview, and then the person who interviewed me and gave me the job said afterwards that experience, it will help you. We thought you would be perfect for this job because living on a fishing boat for 10 days is not exactly luxurious. So we knew if you could do that, then you could cope with going on a fishing boat. So all of the experiences that you have when you're doing your projects do come in handy, even if you can't see it at the time.
Great, thanks so much for that insight. Kind of relating to that, I guess, I was also wondering what led you to choose to work in environmental policy making teams pretty much straight away out of your master's degree, as opposed to going into, something else such as research or, anything beforehand.
Yeah, to be honest, it wasn't a conscious decision. It was actually because the opportunities came up. So I started off in the job at the Marine Lab. So that was a more field-based scientific role where I was going and collecting the information, the biological sampling that they needed to do stock assessments for Scottish fisheries. And then that sort of led into the bigger picture of assessing European fisheries. So after I'd had that practical experience, I was actually approached by someone who worked in the policy team who said your experience might work really well in our sort of marine conservation policy if you would be interested in applying for a job. So I thought about it and I thought it did sound interesting. So I applied and luckily I got the job. So that was sort of what then led me into the policy side of things because that opportunity came up. So like I say, it wasn't really a conscious decision, but once I started doing it, it was, I felt it's a right fit for me because I enjoy that side of things maybe more than going out and collecting all of the biological samples. You know, I'd done that for 2.5 years, so I was ready for a different challenge by the time I'd got the other job.
Sounds great. Thanks for the answer. Relating to that fisheries focus, I saw on LinkedIn that your career always had a fisheries focus up until 2020, if that's right. I was just wondering how come you decided to change and become a polar ocean specialist in 2020? And I was also wondering if that's still quite related to fisheries management or if it's something kind of entirely different that your career path has just led you to.
Yes. Well, again, I think it's to do with the opportunities that came up that I decided to take. So I was happy doing the fisheries policy work with the WWF. It was really interesting and I worked with a lovely team. But the opportunity came up in the polar team for the polar oceans role. So I decided to go for it. So the role does still involve quite a bit of fisheries management advice because there is fishing activity that takes place in both of the polar regions. So that's still, it's completely different though. So it's also something that I'm having to learn about, even though I've got the experience for a few years now of working in fisheries policy in the UK, in Scotland and the UK. It is completely different. It's a different way of management. It's a different type of fishing. It's just something new for me to learn about. But it is really interesting. So that was really it. But also I was, when I was at the University of Glasgow, there was a module on extreme biology, which I'm not sure if it's still there. So I had taken that and there's a section on polar or organisms that live in the polar regions, and that was something that at that time had made me really interested in the polar regions. And so when this job came up, it seemed like it was meant to be. It brought back all those memories of studying at university, and I just thought, oh, this is perfect. I need to go for it. So I was lucky enough to get the job.
Rhona, I'm going to ask you a question. It's the classic question that people ask about people's careers, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What does your day-to-day work look like as a polar ocean specialist? Maybe you could compare it to the fisheries management beforehand. I know that people's answers are usually, well, it varies enormously from day to day. Every day is different. But have you got any points that you might be able to share with the students that would give them some sort of insight?
Yeah, so the general overarching point of my role is to work with different people, different stakeholders. So that could be other NGOs, other people who have businesses in the polar regions, so fisher, like people who own the fishing businesses, the UK government or other governments, and also other people within WWF. So at the start you mentioned it's an international organisation, so actually most days I speak to people on Zoom from Australia or Norway or America, and it's amazing that it's such a big international community. So most days that's the main thing that I do, is try and work with all of those people to come up with better ideas for how we can manage the polar regions. So we have different projects that we fund and that we help to work on. So I sort of help with those, give advice. I'll draft briefing documents, or maybe for the UK government if they're taking part in important meetings, things like that. So that's with all of the advice, that's the things that we want to see them doing. I'll write a briefing about and say, we want you to do this or say this. And things like that, or have calls with people just to talk about new research that's out or things like that. So it is mostly office based, so it's not unfortunately exciting like jetting off to the polar regions or things like that. It is sort of sitting in my spare room here doing a lot of work on the computer, but it's really interesting, and it's fantastic to get to speak to people from all over the world and hear those different experiences, and like just all of the different work that's going on in different countries everywhere. It's really interesting.
Great, thank you.
Great, thanks. So as someone who's interested in a career in research and academia myself, what would your advice be to a researcher to ensure that their research is considered in policies and can influence policy-making decisions?
So I would say that one of the best things that you could do is to keep an eye on and make sure that you understand what the policy priorities for the government are, or sort of organisations are. So for example, in Scotland, the government does have a policy priority to establish a well-managed network of marine protected areas. So that could inform your research. So you think, well, they're interested in marine protected areas, they need information about that, so that could focus your research. So you would look at marine protected areas, maybe how they work, or you could pinpoint a species that has to be protected and do some research on them. So that, I would say, that would definitely be a good way to make sure that what you're doing is relevant for the governments that are in charge and ultimately are the ones who will implement the policy for you based on your science. The government does have a couple of sort of statutory scientific advisors. So that's Scottish Natural Heritage, which they were when I was there. It's actually called Nature Scot now, I think. So they give advice on our inshore waters. And then you've got JNCC, which is the Joint Nature for Conservation Committee, or something like that. I think they're just known as JNCC. So they provide advice for offshore areas. So then you could, when you graduate, you could look at the work that they're doing, and that would help to inform what you want to do next. And also you could try and work with organisations like WWF, because we provide research grants for things that we think are interesting and that would then help to influence policy. And then your science would influence the government through us. So we would use the information you give us to tell the government.
Thanks so much. That was really, really helpful.
And so I'm just thinking about when you were a student, Rhona, was there any volunteering or any extracurricular activities or things that aided you in getting into your chosen career?
So when I was at the uni, I participated in the Exhibition Society. So actually, which I suppose is a bit odd, the students this year probably won't get to do anything quite like that, but I was lucky enough to go on the Turtle Watch expedition that year, and we went to Akrotiri in Cyprus for 5 weeks to sort of look after the nesting turtles there. So if the turtles come up to nest on the beaches, we left them alone to lay their eggs, and then we put protective cages around the eggs so that they couldn't be dug up by dogs or anything like that. So that was amazing. That was a fantastic experience. It was good. We have some sun as well for 5 weeks, so that was nice after being in Glasgow. So that was one thing at the uni. I also had a part-time job, which is maybe not so exciting, but I worked in a bank on the weekends and also on my holidays. So although it's not directly related to marine biology, it definitely improved my work skills. It's still transferable skills that you can use when you go into another job. So people do look for that if you've got that experience, which is good. I also volunteered with the British Trust for Conservation Volunteers. So that was just a few times. And again, it wasn't actually marine biology related. It was going into Glasgow and just helping to tidy up the parks and things like that. But it was all good experience, and it looked good on my CV. So.
Yeah. Great, thanks. You just done my job for me. Great, Rhona. So basically, get out there and keep your part-time jobs and do some volunteering, because it all looks fantastic on your CV. So just a bit of wild card question for you, Rhona. If you weren't doing this job in this sort of area, what might you be doing?
Well, the other subject that I really enjoyed when I was at school was music. So I suppose in another life, I would like to take my saxophone and go and play in some jazz band or something somewhere, or in an orchestra, and make a living doing music. So I do still have it as a hobby, but I suppose it would be a different career path anyway.
Yeah.
Biology.
And on that note, I'm always quite keen to say to students, have a plan B, just not because I want to spoil people's plans, or but it's because it's just a wise way to go about your career. Did you have a plan B?
To be honest, I'm not really a planner, so I didn't even really have a plan A. I sort of had to plan to go to uni and study marine biology, and then I hadn't really thought about what I would do afterwards. So what I would say is kind of almost do have an idea of what you know, everyone will know what they like or what they enjoy, or if you enjoy the research side of things better than thinking about policy. But I would say just sort of go with the flow, take the opportunities where they come. And my first job in the lab, I sort of happened to just see the advert online, and then it said something about going on boats at sea, and I thought, that sounds quite interesting, even though it wasn't really, it was related because it was on fisheries going out to sea, but I thought, I'll just apply and see how I get on. And then from that, it's led to all these different opportunities that I hadn't even thought about. So what I would say is, don't have an idea what you want to do, but don't sort of rigidly plan and then get disappointed if those opportunities don't come off, because there'll be different ones that you can take advantage of.
I suppose that's in essence like having a plan B and a plan C by being open and flexible. You just don't know what those plans are at the moment. But yeah, no, good answer, good answer. So moving on, I just wondered, had there been a person, a moment, an event that's had a defining influence on your career to date?
I suppose I can't think of anything sort of major that's really influenced me. Maybe the first, when I asked the teacher at primary school who works with dolphins, because that was when I decided to be a marine biologist. Also, maybe even more recently, you do sort of get lost sometimes in your job and just the day-to-day reading things, doing emails and stuff like that. But I did recently, well, not that recently, a few years ago, watched a documentary about Sylvia Errol, who's quite a famous female marine biologist, on Netflix, and that was sort of another inspiring moment, because she's lived her whole life to promote the oceans and conservation of the oceans, and she's still doing it now, even she's sort of in her 80s just now, but she still goes around, promotes the oceans conservation. And yeah, I suppose that's a sort of a person or a moment where I felt a new sense of purpose, and wanted to be like her and do things that she had done and stuff. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Zoe.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's really interesting, actually, because I've watched that Mission Blue documentary as well, and I watched it at when I was still at school, and that was also a big deciding factor, I guess. It really does give you a lot of focus and purpose. Yeah,
which is very inspirational, because actually I made my mum watch it as well, and then now she's like an ocean cat. I've studied marine biology and then been working in it for years, and it took that one documentary and she was like, no, I need to go and do beach cleans and stuff, and I'm like, okay, you could do that. I'd already asked you to do that, but it's like she just Sylvia Errol has a way of just getting across the point.
Yeah. So I was also wondering, how do you think students can make themselves more marketable in your sector, especially during these challenging times with COVID and everything going on? And kind of along those lines, what is the most valuable advice that you could give any marine and freshwater or zoology or student?
So I think one thing that I hadn't really thought of when I was a student was trying to approach organisations like WWF for advice. I would say that that's actually quite a good way to make contacts as well, and also just to find out what the organisations are working on. And things like that. That's really interesting. It helps you to form opinions on what you want to do as well after you finish at uni. Another main thing I would say is try and volunteer when you can in something conservation related. It doesn't always have to be marine biology, and it can be hard because if you can't afford maybe to go and there's volunteer schemes where you go abroad and do things, but there are opportunities in Glasgow or in Scotland that you can do as well, and those things help you to stand out on when people are reading the CVs. So that would be the main piece of advice, and also I would say maybe practice your interview skills. So you've not told me to say that, Fiona, but I was just thinking, so I recently had my first experience of interviewing people for a job. So that was my first chance of being on the other side of the thing. So there's always people who have great experience and things like that, but if you don't really know how to answer interview questions, then it will be more difficult to get the jobs that you want, because nowadays you sort of get asked competency-based questions. So if you've got practice of doing that kind of interview, then it's better for you.
Yeah, good tip, Rhona. I'm always saying to students, you do get judged on your interview, and you need to put your best self forward, and it's not something that comes naturally to anybody. You have to practice the techniques, the structure, being able to showcase yourself when we live in quite a modest world. So I think, yeah, it is something that needs to be practiced. But anyway, the questions that we've just had were Zoe's questions and my questions, and you've answered them beautifully. So now we're over to the student questions. Zoe has been a superstar and asked her classmates for questions that they would have liked to pose to you had they been in this call. So I'll pass over to Zoe now to ask them.
Yeah, so the first one would just be, how do you think COP26 will impact wildlife conservation?
Well, that's a good question. Hopefully it'll have a great impact if the world leaders actually take action and agree to radical emissions cuts and targets. So hopefully, if they do agree something really impactful, then it'll be positive. If they agree to sort of limit the warming of the climate to 1.5 degrees, so that's sort of where we want things to be. Well, obviously we don't really want it to be there, but that's the sort of minimum damage that there could be. So that would take quite a lot of agreement by world leaders to do that. So there is, of course, a chance that they won't agree ambitious targets, in which case it won't really have an impact on the way things are going just now. But I think we should try and stay hopeful, and we're hearing a lot of good statements from different world leaders just now about their willingness to achieve something at COP26. So hopefully it will come off and they will actually agree to some ambitious targets, hopefully.
Yeah, fingers crossed. So if we as students want to contribute to polar conservation, what would be the most effective way for us to do so?
Yeah, so I think probably as students, one of the main things that you could all do is raise your own awareness with people that you speak to, because you'll know more than most people the impact of climate change on the world, but also the polar regions are the most impacted by climate change in the whole world. They also help to regulate our climate, so the more impacted they are, the worse the climate warming is becoming. So just on a personal level, raise awareness, but also do all the things that we know that we're supposed to be doing to limit our own impact on the world and on the climate. So that's all the things like taking public transport, reduce, reuse, recycle, all of the things, and just try and limit our own impact as much as possible, and then raise awareness with everybody else so that we can see those big changes in the decisions that are made at things like COP26.
Yeah, definitely. So what do you think then that the biggest threat to the poles is currently or in the future, and how do you think that could be overcome?
Yeah, so I think I just mentioned climate change is the biggest impact for both of the polar regions. So the Arctic is the fastest warming place on the planet. Antarctica is warming sort of differently. Some areas are really warming and other areas are not so impacted yet, but it is still all impacted by global warming and climate change. So that's the main thing that we have to address for both of those regions at the moment. There is obviously human activity in both of those regions that can be managed, but the biggest impact is climate change.
And how do you think, or what is the current way forward to managing that?
So I think the current way forward is to try and manage our emissions. The global emissions have to be reduced. We have to think on a personal level what we're doing, but also just put in place, there are solutions that we could put in place to help build climate resilience in those regions. So one thing that I've been working on a lot for both of the regions is trying to promote marine protected areas. So they are well known for, there's been a lot of research about the benefits of marine protected areas, and one of the benefits is building climate resilience. So that's something that we want to see, is a network of marine protected areas in the Arctic Ocean as well as the Southern Ocean.
So apart from some of the marine protected areas also being established in the polar regions, what other policies are currently in place regarding protection of the polar regions?
Yeah, so the polar regions are both managed differently. So the Arctic is, as I'm sure you know, it's an ocean surrounded by land. So the land is all the different countries that have the coastline on the Arctic Ocean. So they all currently manage their own areas of sea in their own ways. So they manage their own fisheries. There's oil and gas activity, fishing, and a few other things, mining for gems and things like that. So they actually all manage that all separately. But there is the Arctic Council, where those countries do come together to discuss, different ways forward and different ways that they can protect the Arctic. But in the Southern Ocean, it's managed by the CAMLAR, which is the Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources. So there's 26 member states that join CAMLAR, and that's including the UK. So they all get together. The annual meeting's actually starting tonight, so I'm going to be logging on at 10 o'clock tonight to join the first day of that meeting, because it's in Australia time, which is going to be really good. So that's, everybody gets together to talk about the management of the Southern Ocean, and so as well as talk about climate change and marine protected areas, we talk about management of the different fisheries that are down there. And things like that. So the fisheries are managed in the Southern Ocean, but everything can always be improved. So that's what they discuss when they get together.
Yeah, great. So just a fisheries-based question again. So given your previous fisheries-based focus, do you have any suggestions as to what the most sustainable fish species would be to eat in Scotland? And also what other things do we have to watch out for when buying fish if we're concerned about sustainability? Like, I imagine there's quite a range from, like, ranging from the net that was used to the countries that the fish were caught in, and then the season fish were caught in. But how do you kind of keep track of all of that when actually buying something in a shop?
Yes, so I think the answer to both of those questions might be to use the Good Fish Guide, which is produced by the Marine Conservation Society every year. It was actually just published again last week, sorry. So that's the updated advice for this year. So, and that goes through all of the state of the stocks. It considers how the fish were caught, the fish or shellfish have been caught, whether it's been through trawling or static gear or dredging, things like that. It puts it all together into a nice guide for you online. So when you're in the shop, you could look it up quickly and just check, is this fish okay for me to eat? And there is the MSC certification as well. If you're in a rush and you're in the shop, you can just look for the MSC tick on the fish and just make sure that what you're buying has been caught in a sustainable fishery. And that way you don't have to sort of sit and look through things online and just check. But generally fish or shellfish that are caught with static gear types are more sustainable than fish that are caught with dredges or trawlers, because it has a less environmental impact.
Great, thanks. That's great. The Good Fish Guide is definitely, a good suggestion. just kind of as the final question, I guess, the pools are obviously like very highly productive environments that support a lot of the marine food chain. And we were just wondering what you'd predict would be the effects if productivity in the pools was to drastically drop due to anthropogenic effects. And yeah, would the entire ecosystem collapse? So like, in other words, yeah, just kind of why it's so important to conserve the polar regions.
Yes, so I think obviously there are anthropogenic activities in the two poles, but like I've mentioned, really climate change is the biggest impact in both regions. So that coupled with the anthropogenic effects would, if there was a drop in productivity, so just taking the Southern Ocean as an example, Antarctic krill are the keystone species of that entire food web. So say the productivity dropped, the Antarctic krill disappeared, or which they're already doing, their areas are contracting as the sea ice disappears and things like that, and the sea temperatures are rising. So that would have, the whole ecosystem would collapse. And then that has a big impact sort of globally, because there are quite a lot of cetaceans or whales that go down to the Southern Ocean, and they migrate. They can actually migrate from the Southern Ocean all the way up to the Northern Hemisphere. So then that has a knock-on effect on all those other ecosystems that depend on those species that feed in Antarctica. So yeah, it would be catastrophic if things like that were to disappear. And that's why it's so important that we work to try and protect the regions.
Thanks, Zoe. So, Rhona, I'm just wondering, are you looking forward to COP26? Will you be taking part in it? Will you be going there?
Yeah, so we actually have the Panda Pavilion, where so there'll be people from the UK who are going, and also WWF international offices. Quite a lot of people are coming for it. So that'll be really good. We've actually got an event on Southern Ocean and krill. So I was just talking about krill there. We've got a video about how Antarctic krill are the superheroes of the Southern Ocean. So we're hosting an event to do with that. So I actually don't think that I can get in person, because the badges are limited. So I'll need to watch that online. But we've also got another exciting event in the planetarium called Walrus from Space. So that's launching later this week, where we're going to be asking members of the public to log into a special system where we want them to count the number of walrus on pictures that we've got from satellite images. So I'll be there for that. So that'll be good. Because it would be a shame if COP is in Glasgow and I can't go. that would have been horrible. So
yeah. I mean, I think we'd all like to be able to go there, but it's just for the higher Hegians. Anyway, our time is up today. I just like to thank Zoe for accompanying me today in the interview, but also thank you very much to Rhona for speaking to us today, talking about your career journey so honestly and openly, and for taking time out of a busy schedule. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your answers as well.
No problem.